Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I am the director of the Ashland Public Library. This is the third time we are hosting Loretta Chase and Susan Holloway Scott, the two nerdy history girls, to talk about the deep research they do into getting their books out and making us love them. So before I hand it over to them, I just wanted to say a couple things. One is I'd like to thank the Friends of the Ashland Public Library for supporting our programs. And I'd also like to welcome the patrons of the Tewksbury Library who are joining us tonight. So as you see in the chat, feel free to put in like where you're coming from and how excited you are as I do this quick introduction. So Loretta Chase, one of my favorite authors, is she's just an icon of the romance genre. She wrote The Lord of Scoundrels, which was for the longest time the number one all-time favorite book on all about romance. And I remember it was there for years and years and years. And I can't remember what pushed her off, but it must have been like something, you know, like Harry Potter or something. So she's a legend. And Susan Holloway Scott is an amazing historical fiction writer who also does deep research and has written about Aaron Burr and the white, is it Liza Hamilton?
Liza Hamilton,
yep.
Yeah.
And so like her characters are people that we'll recognize, but she just has this amazing look into their lives, which I think is just incredible. And I think you're going to really enjoy them. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you guys to talk about the work that you do, like I said, the deep dives into research. And I'm going to start with, I forgot. If you have questions for Loretta and Susan, please put them in the Q&A and I will be moderating those. And if you have just conversation or chat with each other, feel free to put that in the chat. So I'm going to start with a question because this one's been like burning in the back of my brain for a while. Is Loretta, you and Susan both post on social media about different artworks that you see and how they relate to history and how well they're done. And what strikes me about them all is the people are so clean, you know, like, you know, from history that these people didn't shower or bathe daily and everything. And I was just like, is this artwork true to life? Or did they actually bathe on the day of a portrait? Or is it like, you know, a little bit of artistic license?
Okay, Loretta, who's going to start?
I'll start, but I know you're going to be more articulate than I am.
No, I doubt it. I doubt it.
It's we have this idea that the people in the past were dirtier than we are because they didn't take a shower daily. Well, for a lot of people, that just wasn't a possibility. You wanted to fill a bathtub, the servants would have to come up with buckets and buckets of hot water to fill your bathtub. But people did wash, and I think, as I understand it, they washed their entire body, but it was like a sponge bath. And they also wore clean underthings. The linens that were under their clothes were clean. So because they did not have the same bathing habits that we do, doesn't mean they were dirty. So Susan, I know you can give more detail about this.
And now Trixie, that was the cat that was back. She's finally gotten bored and moved away. So that's good. Yeah, people were not dirty. They didn't immerse themselves in a bathtub. As Loretta said, even very wealthy people did not have access to that much warm water, but everybody had a washstand in their, wherever they were, even if you're a servant, whatever, you would have a bowl. You would have water, you would wash yourself, what we would think of as a sponge bath now. And you would be washed head to toe. You just wouldn't get into a shower or into a tub. And the other thing they did is that they changed their undergarments. For men, it would be a shirt. For women, it would be of shift. And those were natural fiber. They were linen. They would absorb perspiration, body smells. And so they changed that every day, every couple of days. So they weren't dirty. It's that whole idea that they were, the past was somehow dirtier. It's a different kind of standard than what we have, but cleanliness was very prized. They didn't want to be dirty and smelly, which is not to say that there weren't people who weren't, just as there are people now. If you go on the subway, you will meet people who are still or not cleaned by your standards. So I think it's just a different notion of cleanliness. And to get to your idea about the portrait, I think people would have spent, most people, even a wealthy person, would only have their portrait done once, maybe twice in their entire lives. So they want to be presented in the most perfect way possible. So yeah, they don't want to be, they would wear their best clothes, they would compose themselves, they would want to look really good for a portrait. And that would be, of course, being clean, having their hair just so. And I'm sure with artists, it's kind of like Photoshop. If you say, I make my hair bigger, or I want my hair nicer, the artist would oblige. So you would get a perfect view of how you want it to be.
Interesting. I love that. Photoshop for artists back in the day. Okay, so I'm going to have to like revise how I think about sanitation in earlier days. Cecilia asks, how do you approach researching specific aspects of history? Sort of something like you need to know about the architecture in the 1840s or the bedding materials of the 1830s. Like how do you like get into those nitty gritties?
Loretta?
Well, I have, you can see part of my library behind me. So I have tons of books. And after all these years of writing, I kind of know which book I want to go to for the information. But also a lot of it now is online. And you evolve some sources over time where you know are reliable. You get the information from images. I use images a lot now because they're much more available than they used to be. And I have posted on Facebook, for instance, interiors, which inspire me in doing scenes. And they also give you an idea of like, how was this room laid out? What furnishings were in it? So, specific topics like fashion, I know exactly where I'm going to go to look. I'm going to go to the women's magazines. Some other topics might be a little more difficult. Like I'm trying to figure out exactly how a ball was, what were the steps when you're giving a ball? What was the invitation like? Was it on a card? Was it in a letter form? Was it placed in an envelope? And then I have to find out, okay, how did they do it in the 1830s? So sometimes that means going to a couple of different sources looking for the information. So it's not a quick answer to that. They're just a variety of ways, and over time you learn how to do it fairly efficiently.
Susan?
Yeah, and I think it's also, Loretta and I have written in the same time periods. We've chosen our little decades. And so I'm mostly 18th century, she's mostly 1830s. So once you get into that, it builds. It isn't like you start fresh with each book. You sort of build up that knowledge so that when you're imagining scenes, you know what the window, that there are casement windows that open out, or if they lift up and down with a sash, you just kind of know a lot of that basic stuff. Sometimes I think Loretta's right in that magazines, books, letters will tell you a lot of that nitty gritty stuff. It's also the places, I've been fortunate since my most recent books have been set in America, and a lot of the places that my characters would go still exist, and I could visit them. So that way I can sort of go and see, oh, here comes Trixie again. I can actually see what things were like. Oh, the stairs go this way, or there are the pianofortes over in this corner because it would be an interior wall. Where is the washstand in the bedchamber? And then you can sort of see that, or what people are seeing outside a specific room window, which makes it a lot easier. Loretta and I both are great fans of Colonial Williamsburg. I don't think we've written any books in Williamsburg, but we have. It's a great source for things like, if you're riding in the carriage, what's it feel like to ride in a carriage? What's it feel like to climb up the little wobbly steps to get into the carriage? And how comfortable is it? And things like, just sort of, again, as you were saying, the nitty gritty kinds of things, you just can observe that. For me, one of the things I like best about Williamsburg is seeing the people who are the interpreters who are dressed in 18th century clothing, because for them, it's not a costume, it's just their clothes. So you see how they move and how the clothes work on an actual body rather than trying to look at a picture.
That's really interesting. Like the reenactors, you can really see, you know, I think, and we talked about that in our very first session, was that in Williamsburg, they do it exactly as it was, right? Like they make their own clothes, you know.
Well, the clothes are mostly made by hand for them.
I mean, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Authentic.
Well, some of the people make their own, and, you know, but I think because people dress like that every day, because they're going to work like that every day, so that they are they're not conscious of, I am wearing an 18th century dress. They're just I'm wearing clothes, and there are patches and the hems are dirty, and, you know, they're just clothes.
Okay. Alexis asks, what are your favorite ways to research historical fashion?
Oh, Loretta, there you go.
I love the magazines, and I love actually having the magazines in my hand, because as nice as some of the scans are, they're never as nice as the originals. But the magazines are my primary source. That they have lovely images, and they're hand colored, and they will have usually detailed descriptions. What else was it? What was the rest of the question?
Just what is your favorite ways to research historical fashion?
Yeah, that's it would be the magazines.
Okay.
But then after that comes Colonial Williamsburg, because I can talk to the tailor and the mantua maker, and even though their work, what they're doing there is a certain time in the 1700s, they also have studied other time periods, and they can enlighten me about aspects of fashion that I'm not going to get from the magazines. The last time I was there, Mark Hutter was explaining to me about the way men's sleeves were cut and how that affected their posture and the way that they stood. That's not something I would have found in a magazine. So those two are the best ways to talk to interpreters and to actually look at the magazines from the time.
I have to ask, have you guys read The Knight in Shining Armor by Jude Deveraux?
Long time ago.
Time ago.
There's that there's a scene, and I haven't read it in a long time either, but I remember there's the scene because the character comes up in time, and he's like, what is with these clothes? They have no frills, they have no character. So I think that's really interesting.
Well, Loretta and I were talking last night about one of the things that people, when they're thinking about clothes of the past, just like thinking about people who are not clean or whatever, they think everything was uncomfortable and it took a really long time to get dressed. And you think about if you turn it around the other way and put a woman from 1770 who can get dressed really fast in all those layers, especially if she has a maid or a sister to help her. But she would be horrified at the thought of trying to wriggle into Spanx, for example, or wear really high spike heels, or as Loretta said, jeans. They would, women that had always worn skirts would just be like, are you kidding? You want me to wear those? So it's just
horrible.
I know.
I know their underwear didn't even have their underwear was split in the middle. They wouldn't get it. Like, really? That tight thing in your crotch?
And the synthetic, they're used to wearing linen, really, fine, depending on how wealthy they were, the finest linen, which is a natural fiber. And they would just be horrified by spandex.
I'm still back there with hearing Loretta Chase say crotch. So they'll give me a minute. Actually, this goes back to something you said, Loretta. Natalie says, how are men's sleeves cut, which would affect the way they stand? The sleeves.
I'm talking about the sleeve of the coat as opposed to the sleeve of their shirt.
Okay. Because
the sleeve of the shirt is a fairly substantial thing. It's a loose, huge, and usually fine linen, but the arm side is in the coat is tiny, is little,
Mhm.
and it forces them to stand very straight, shoulders back. And this is also, this is a similar thing to the women's corsets or stays.
Mhm.
It requires you to stand in a certain way. That's considered a healthy way to stand. And it's an attractive way to stand, but the clothes are accommodating this. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's a very tight sleeve that makes you have to keep your shoulders back.
Narrow backs, the backs
Yeah.
are narrow, so you really do have to sort of, the goals sort of feel like you're pressing your shoulder blades together. Again, it's the same thing with the women's clothes. It's as Loretta said, the corsets or stays from that time period, or it's a straight front. The kind of costumes that they have in movies where it's all cleavage and bosoms and stuff, that was not desired. It's more to have a flat front rather than huge push-up.
Yeah.
I mean, that's later.
Cleavage was not a thing.
No,
Really?
no.
No,
In fact,
They
the
wanted them
underwear sort of pushes,
separated.
it pushes you sideways. I mean, they go sideways.
So all of those shows that we've been watching are not accurate.
No.
Okay.
That's I guess the first thing to say about when you're researching historical clothing is don't look at movies, don't look at TV. Just forget all that.
Okay. All right. So Judith asks, at what point did people switch over from chamber pots to outhouses, or were they? I think my question for that is, were they concurrent at most times?
Yeah. Loretta, are you going to talk or?
Again, it depends. Chamber pots were continued in use well into the 20th century and are probably in use in some places still. And then in some houses, they did have water closets installed fairly early on. It wasn't a common thing, but it was something you would find in the richer people's houses. You would find they would have a bathroom, they would have a water closet. For the most part, everything I've seen looking at, say, the houses in London, it's mostly they have that outhouse in the back.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're living in a little house or in a flat, you're using the outhouse in the back, and that's going on well into the 20th century. If you're rich, you have nicer fixtures and you have them inside the house, but you also have servants to clean up for you.
Mm-hmm.
I think for most people, except if you're very wealthy, the outhouse, it's a privy, which is what it's called, but it's out in the back. And there are some of them with multiple holes, so the families would go out there together. And it as Loretta says, it continues well into the 20th century. There are places that don't have running water, and the chamber pots are more for nighttime when you didn't want to go outside into the unheated privy, and it would stay under your bed, and either you had to take it out or the servant took it out, or one of your kids took them out. But you didn't necessarily use a chamber pot during the day. Most people would go out to the privies instead.
Mm-hmm. I guess that's where, I've read that people would dump their chamber pots like just out the window in their buildings. And that doesn't sound like what is that true?
It's true.
Yeah, out into the gutter and hope what is it called, Loretta? Like in city streets. It has a name, like a channel or thing.
I can't think of the name right now. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's when we were in Edinburgh, they said something. I'm trying to remember what the term that they used when someone would yell before they would empty the chamber pot.
Gardy-loo or
Gardy-loo. Yes.
Yeah.
Watch your heads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and even if you have a privy and the privy's in the backyard and you have the night soil man come clean out your privy for you, but it's still that is not hygienic. I know you're talking about dirty, physically you're clean, but there's just some things that are not clean. And they write about, you read contemporary sources about how a lot of people just constantly have low-level stomach issues because a lot of the things, why don't we get off on this, but things from the privy are getting into the germs from that are getting into the water supplies, into wells and stuff too. So people are just always kind of feeling a little off.
It was something that Dickens was talking about in Bleak House, particularly when he's talking about the mud. What he's talking about is that streets are filled with manure. They're filled with crap. And, you know, that and the wet and the mud. So it's pretty mucky. And that's why you have all those crossing sweepers to clear the way for people.
Okay.
Yeah, not pretty.
Not pretty. So actually, I'm losing the name. Kate says that the ghost map, I don't know if you've read that, about cholera by Stephen Johnson, explains a lot about privies, etc. So I'm gonna have to pick that up because I'm sort of curious, because you do hear about the sanitation and things like that, but I will read that at some point.
Well, things
They
like
didn't know about bacteria.
they know about germs and stuff. And so if you have an epidemic of cholera or typhus or typhoid, it just goes really fast.
So here's a question about that, because you write, you know, historical romance, historical fiction. Does any of that really get into your books, or is it too?
Oh, mine does.
It
Mine
does.
does. Yeah. Yeah.
Because you want to make it realistic, or because?
Well, that, and I think I try not to be gratuitous about anything, but if it informs how the character creates the character, you sort of have to include it. In The Secret Wife of Aaron Burr, the woman, my heroine was an enslaved lady's maid. So she's intimately involved with taking out the chamber pots and taking care of her mistress's, you know, all her bodily functions. She knows that the mistress is not pregnant because she's aware of when the woman has her period. I mean, there's all those little intimate things tied in with that. And so, yeah, I included things like that in the book because it was part of the character.
Got it.
But you're not going to sort of sit down and say, chapter 4, the chamber pots, you know, it's, it has to, I think all the research in the best books about the past is it's all just kind of works in seamlessly. It's just all part of the character, the world. I know I've said this before, when you're writing in the past, and that science fiction people talk a lot about world building, creating their world. And that's what we're doing too. We're just creating a world that actually exists. It's just most people now aren't familiar with it. So you're looking for the details that bring it to life, make it relevant for a modern reader, but also feel right for your people of the past.
Because I don't see that in historical romances.
Very little.
Yeah.
No, because it wouldn't work there. It's not right.
Yeah, it kind of, I mean, I've had people be sick, and you know, occasionally they're like little bits, but it's not, I mean, for instance, I'm setting books in 1832 and 1833 when there was this terrific 1831 actually started the really severe first cholera epidemic that just swept across Europe. And when people were dying left and right, but I'm not going to be going into detail about that. First of all, if you know what cholera does, it's not pretty. And it doesn't seem to have a place in romance. It spoils the fantasy.
Got it. Yes. Yeah. And Mercedes says, in Dukes Prefer Blonde, the heroine had typhus, but it was jail fever. Is that correct?
Yes, typhus was known as jail fever. Okay. So that's a case where she does contract this ailment. But again, I don't go into a lot of detail about it. I conferred with the doctor who helped me by looking up the way these things were handled in the past. And we came to some how would we deal with this? Because the likelihood of her dying is very high.
Mhm.
And how am I going to keep her alive? Given what resources someone would have at that time.
Mhm.
So if that's as close as I could get to being accurate, based on everything that we could find about the ailment. But again, I didn't go into detail about what she's suffering. I
Well,
just sort of touched on things.
Yeah, you want them to live happily ever after.
Yeah.
You want to end
The
that book on a
diagnosis
high
practice
point.
doesn't work.
Yeah, it's always hard for me when I'm writing about real people because you can't avoid it. And I even when I know things are coming in somebody's life, because you're omniscient, how their lives go. I really dread having to write, especially deaths of children and things like that they're really hard. The book I just finished is on Martha Washington, and Martha has 4 children and they all predecease her. So it's very sad. It's hard, those were hard to write.
So actually that brings me to a question that Kiwi asked, and it starts with Loretta, why Dukes? But I also want to add to that and say, for Susan, why realistic historical fiction? Like, why real characters that we might have actually heard about and read about? So why Dukes? Why real people?
Why Dukes is because that's what people want. They want Dukes. I could write Earls, I could write Marquises, but they want Dukes. So we write Dukes, and we've created thousands of them. And in reality, there were about 24. And almost none of them were cute.
No, they're all no. Whenever you see photographs, even today, of modern Dukes, it's like they're not. It's not Fantasy Island.
Yeah, the tall and handsome and unmarried, and or some of them were grandfathers, and not at all what we're putting into the books. But we're creating an idealized world. And I don't even understand why people love Dukes so much, but they do. And it's kind of fun because they're so powerful, that I could get them to do things that if maybe a lower ranking guy couldn't do. So that's fun.
Well, that's what they have. They have infinite wealth. They have huge houses, multiple houses. They have a lot of power. They know royalty. What's not to like about them?
Yeah.
Fun to write about.
And they're pretty easy to research because most of the dukedoms have continued. So it's not that hard to get the information about them and adapt the information to the story.
Actually, I have a question about that because, today is the day that Harry's book comes out, Spare, big debut for, and so he was named the Duke of Sussex, right? Like, how does that happen? Like, that somebody just decides that they can name you something?
It's a royal dukedom, which is like it's only for princes.
Oh, I see.
And the queen has the power, the king or queen has the power to confer the title on members of her family. And the Duke of Sussex is a title that previous princes have had. And in fact, the Duke of Sussex at the time that I'm writing about was a very interesting guy. He was like one of the younger sons of King George III. And he was pretty liberal minded. And he sounded like someone who was really nice and I'd like to get to know. But it's that's one of the royal titles that the monarch has the power to pass on to someone. And it doesn't necessarily descend. It depends on I'm not going to go into the details because it just gets complicated.
Okay. So Susan, how did you make the decision to write about people that we might have actually heard about?
I guess I just found them interesting. And I think especially writing about women that are known in American past. Really, when you look back, 18th century America, there are only 3 women. There's Betsy Ross, Martha, and maybe Abigail Adams, and there are no other women in the American Revolution. I don't know where they all went, but they're not out there. So for me, I enjoy the challenge of bringing them back into making people more aware that there are women, they did have agency, they did contribute. George would not have been George Washington without Martha there. I really think Martha pushed him quite a bit. I think that Eliza Hamilton kept Alexander in line. I think that there's a lot of that it's just overlooked. You know, the women are just supposed to be at home with the babies and stuff. And so I really enjoy making them part of the American story as well. Different kinds of people. I think that's important. And I know a lot of people are not going to pick up a nonfiction history book that's saying the same kind of thing, but fiction, I hope that I make them feel more real and people come away with a different point of view than what they learned in fourth grade history.
So was there something for both of you that sparked the idea when you were doing research? Was there ever a book that was sparked by something you were doing for maybe another book or just noodling on your own?
They do. It's sort of hard to pinpoint. I mean, that's like the favorite question for all authors dread is that whole, where do you get your ideas? It's like, they just kind of, they find you. As you say, you're researching something else. I would have wanted to write about Eliza Hamilton long before Lin-Manuel Miranda wrote Hamilton on Broadway. And I had proposed it to my agent, and she was like, nobody knows that. No one's interested in that. And so it just kind of sat. And in fact, there's a Two Nerdy History Girls blog that's probably like 12 years old now about Eliza Hamilton that I really wanted to turn into a book. And then when the play came out, it was a big success. Everyone's like, oh, you still want to write that book? So yeah, sometimes I don't know where they come from. I don't know. Right, Loretta?
Yeah, it's hard for me to backtrack because after you've written several books, I don't really remember what started this one or that one.
Yeah, we've written a gazillion books anyway.
Well, you have.
Well, you've written a lot too.
I'm working on 24, my dear.
That's
You got like what?
Still a lot of books. It's still a lot of books.
I know, we're waiting for the next one. So
yeah.
No, we're not gonna go there. Margaret
No
says
pressure.
Hugh Grosvenor, the 7th Duke of Westminster, is handsome, young, available, only 31, and owns a big chunk of London. He fulfills the romance novel stereotype, but he's current, right? Like, I think, we're talking back in the 1800s, where there probably weren't as many. But I'll have to look him up, Margaret. Thank you so much. So I'm going to go back to some fun questions. Cecilia says, what is your favorite historical fun fact? Like picking your children. Go.
Oh, please.
Do you have I don't know.
No, I don't have a favorite historical fun fact.
It's just all sorts of.
There are lots of things.
Yeah.
So pick one, like something that you thought this is interesting. So many things, right?
Trick questions.
Okay, it's a trick question. I'll go back to that one maybe later.
Right, maybe I'll think about
it. This next question is also about what's your favorite book among the ones you've written. So I'll ask you both that. Do you have a favorite book that you've written and why?
Oh, usually it's like you can't ask which is your favorite child. And I have some that I don't like in hindsight, but I'm not going to say that out loud. But I don't know, it usually seems like the best book that you're ever going to write is the next one. The one that is finished and published is not bad. You're pretty satisfied. And the worst possible one is the one you're working on.
Yeah, that about sums it up.
Yep.
Okay. Let me ask you this. When you're in the middle of writing, have you already finished your research, or do you sometimes dive into things as you're writing?
Always dive into things while I'm writing, because I never know what's going to come up.
Yeah.
especially these days. The more you do it, the more you know how little you know.
Mhm.
And then, so you're searching for things. As I said before, I've been searching for this information about, I just want to know how this ball thing worked, because I've got this Duke who's giving these big assemblies every Friday night. And I'm like, okay, how do you send the invitations? And it's him, he's a bachelor. So does he have a hostess? And where do they stand? And are they at the top of the stairs? And do they greet everyone? Are the people announced before they come in? So, and it's like, it's probably going to be 5 words in the manuscript, but I have to have a clear sense in my head of how it goes, or it's hard to write the scene.
Mhm.
So yeah, and that could happen at the very end of the book too.
Mhm. Where you go back.
Yeah, what's this location, or
Mhm.
what kind of bed is it? Would they have the curtains open or closed? And do I want them to have a fire at this time of year? And what was the temperature? Because yes, I look up the temperature because I don't know.
Because you want to
London
know,
had
like, yeah,
different
'cause-
climate than London now.
Well,
My
it's
sister makes fun of me because when I was writing Mr. Impossible, I was wondering where the shadows fell from the
But
pyramid.
but it's true. You just know these things. And it's actually not that hard to find it, because it's written, a lot of gentlemen kept journals, weather journals,
Yes.
and they tell you what everything, seasonable day, light rain in the eve or something. And they tell, I know both George Washington and Thomas Jefferson kept day books they said everything about it. It's and that it actually is important to have, like in one year, in June, there's a snowstorm, and just weird things like that you can then incorporate into the book. So tell your sister, it makes sense.
And the Gentleman's Magazine, for instance, had gives me the weather for London. For every single day, I just find the right year for the Gentleman's Magazine, and I can find little charts that are giving me the weather. So I might fool around with it. Sometimes I do that. I'll change dates and things, but it gives me an idea. I want to have an idea. Is it the temperature's going to be in the 50s, the 60s?
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
looking back at
I think the weather, we tend to live in Loretta and I were talking about this last night, that we tend to live in a very climate controlled place. The weather, unless it's really bad, like in California right now, for the most part, the weather doesn't impact much of our daily lives. But in the past, the weather was much more of a force. I mean, even if you were very wealthy, you were cold in the winter. Having a huge roaring fire, that fire still, the heat is only like 3 or 4 feet out from the fireplace. It doesn't warm the whole room. And what else were we saying? Oh, that the beds with the curtains are all, romantic and cozy, but a lot of that is to create a small warm space in a very cold room for the winter, on a cold night. And that most people, when you woke up in the morning in the winter, you have to break the ice on your washstand to wash. You have to heat the ink in your inkwell before you could write anything, because it's frozen too. So there's just a lot of, like, those little details again, putting in, rather than just saying it was a really cold day. You want to say why it's such a cold day,
Right. So Susan, do you do the same thing in terms of, like, while you're writing, you'll jump into research it if something comes up?
Yes, because I know Loretta and I are the same way, that if we just sat around and researched, we'd never actually write the book. People think that writing fiction is kind of like writing a nonfiction, like a history book, where you want to get everything, you have a thesis and you have to do all the research to support the thesis. Well, it's not. It kind of, as you're going along, you think, oh, this is a cool scene, I want to know that, so that I have to look up this or that specific thing to work for that. And I have to keep myself really focused, because I love finding all this oddball stuff. And I will go, people joke around about going down rabbit holes, and especially with the internet, if you're not careful, you say, I'm going to write 10 pages today, and you spend the whole morning working on just researching, I don't know, something really silly. that
Were there
at the
gas lights
land-
on the street, or were they still using oil? That kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. What time did the lamplighters come out, and where were the link boys? And yeah, and then you realize you never wrote anything that whole day. So it's a challenge. It's fun. We really like it, but it's also a challenge.
So I'm going back to another like old book, a very problematic one, The Flame and the Flower by Kathleen Woodruff. Very
yes.
problematic, but there's a scene in there where they're crossing, you know, the ocean, and it's so cold, and somebody gives her like a knitted pair of pants, and they're just like, this will keep you warm, and she's like, oh, I can't wear pants. Of course she does, because it's so freaking cold. But I still remember that. I mean, I must have read that book like 30 some years ago. But you know, it's an interesting fact. We were talking about the weather and how it affected like the writing, and that you have to find ways to keep your characters alive, really.
Yeah. No, Loretta and I were saying that there's lots of dramatic prints of like overturned coaches and carriages and snowdrifts. That seemed to have been a big, I don't know why, but they sold a lot of prints showing that, of people being flying out of their carriage into the snow. And it's a very dramatic scene with the carriage on its side and people trying to be rescued and everything. But then you think of the reality of it, that your clothes would be soaked. It would be really cold. The road is not plowed like they are now. So you're going to have to, you know, you're probably not wearing boots. And if you are, they didn't come from Eddie Bauer. You know, you're going to have a long, cold walk to the nearest inn or tavern, and you might not make it.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a lot of, it isn't just getting the kitty litter out of the trunk of the car and putting it under the wheels. It would have been a much bigger deal.
I'm just reading Natalie's comment, which is this exactly what I was thinking, is this is why the main characters get naked in the cottage after they've been stranded, because, you know, they have to conserve their body heat. It's a total.
That's true, because their clothes are soaked and they would just be so cold without it. Yes.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
Want to keep our characters alive.
See, weather is
Right.
important. It motivates your characters.
Yes. And of course, the one bed, of
Yeah,
course.
just one bed. Right.
Of course.
At the inn. Okay, so I could keep on this, but I have a bunch of questions. So CJ says, have you discovered later that you got the facts wrong in your books?
Yes.
Oh, early books. I don't. Every so often, people say, "Oh, I wish I could find your first books in print." It's like, no, glad you can't. It's just fine.
Yes.
There's a lot of bad stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything else, is that you learn, you're building on your knowledge over the years, over the books.
Have you ever had to go back and fix something? Like now that things are digital, do you ever go back and change anything in your old books?
No.
It's hard enough for me to even write a book,
Yeah.
let alone go back and
right.
fix the old ones. I wish I could do that, but I can't.
No, and I think going back, sometimes it's a can of worms. If
Yeah.
you start, you know, then you want to fix
Uh-oh.
everything, and it's not the same book, and it's done. Just let it go.
Yeah.
Laura asks, how do you choose an individual person to write about, or individual character?
Is that for me?
Both.
Both of us?
Yeah.
No, they kind
Why
of
don't you start, because you start with real people. So
real people. Well, as I said, sometimes it just is, I want to tell their story. I feel their story isn't told enough. And I've gone from Martha Washington was a real challenge, because there are so many ideas about Martha, most of them from the 19th century, that are not necessarily accurate. The way she's portrayed as the mother of the country and all this stuff, she had a lot more going on than that. And so in a way, that was a very hard book to write, because I had to keep discarding a lot of ideas to try and get back to what Martha really was. And she's another one that there aren't that many letters. They just published finally the project through UVA of Martha's letters, and it's a book about that big. It's all for her whole life. Whereas George's papers, they've been working on them forever, and they're only up to, I don't know, what is it, 27 volumes of them, and they're not even up to the Revolution yet. So there's always so much more for men than
Mhm.
for women. People just didn't keep women's things. And that wasn't the question.
How did you choose, let's say,
How do-
Martha? What?
But the challenge, I guess, of writing about Martha, the book before, The Secret Wife of Aaron Burr, I came across that woman, Mary Emmons, just mentioned in passing when I was working on the Hamilton book. And she just kind of stuck in my head. It's like there was nothing, very little known of her. And most Burr scholars say she didn't even exist. So, but her descendants live in Philadelphia. So she did exist. And because there was nothing about her, I gave her a plausible story based on what little bits of pieces that we know. And I hope that I got close, but there will never be a nonfiction biography because there just isn't the information. So in a way, I gave her a voice and I gave her a life, and people know her name now and they didn't before.
That's amazing.
So anyway.
How about you, Loretta? I mean, I bet you get a lot of reader requests for certain characters. Some of them might have been from me.
Well, they come from someplace in my brain,
Yeah.
and I don't know where, but so many things feed into it. I've done things like, I've taken someone else's work that I found the treatment of women unsatisfactory. And so my heroine is inspired by that, but to be different than that person, or she's going to have a better outcome. So in one of my books, I was so frustrated in Bleak House with what happened to Lady Deadlock, but it was so typical because she did a bad thing. She had sex. She wasn't married. She did a bad thing. So now she has to die. Read those classics of British literature and others, French, they have sex and they have to die. So I was like, okay, my character's had sex, she's had a baby, and no, she's not going to die. She's going to have her happily ever after. But I did that. And then with 10 Things That I Hate About the Duke, it was like, oh boy, The Taming of the Shrew, problematic. I'm going to have to deal with this. So that's how some of the characters come into being. It's just some little thing in whether it's a play or a movie or a book, it just sets me off, and I want to find an alternative or get my little feminist thing going.
No, it's true, because we can do that. We have that power.
We have power.
Make it up. We can make them into real people, and so that somebody else cares about them besides us. So, because we care about them, because we made them up.
Sally asks, how do you balance historically accurate dialogue for a modern audience?
It's tricky because I'm having to work with a limited vocabulary. And at the same time, if I stick to limited vocabulary, my readers are not going to understand what I'm trying to get across. So it's a matter of trying to find a careful balance with what sounds okay, trying not to commit any obvious anachronisms, trying not to commit obvious Americanisms. For that, I have resources that I can turn to. So it's a balance. And there will be some sort of modern things in there, but I'm trying to get them in so that it feels seamless. So it's not jarring. And I think that's the big thing. For some people, it's very jarring when they hear modern conversation and slang in a historical romance. So that's something I'm trying to avoid. But I can't. If I wrote, say, the way Byron did, people wouldn't know what I was talking about. And I would have such a limited vocabulary for expressing certain kinds of feelings and psychological states. So I have to add a little modern to the mix.
Mhm.
It's hard, especially if you're researching. If I'm reading a lot of original letters, I start thinking that way and I will start writing that way. And that's when my editor writes, her favorite expression is too much fiddle faddle.
That's
Where
good.
where I've just written, to 18th century for a modern reader.
Mhm.
And I think that one of the things that you can do is use certain words and then sort of explain what those, through the context, what those words mean to give it more of a feel for the time period. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. And I try not to use words in dialogue that are out of the time period. So that sometimes there are words I'm like, I don't know, and you do the quick check about when the usage comes in, which is really easy to do now, thanks to Google. But Loretta's right. There's a lot of things that modern readers expect. They want to know about a relationship. Well, people in the past didn't talk about relationships.
Right.
And, you have to figure out ways to explain a concept that's true to the time, but that a modern reader will understand. And a lot of times that's through context as much as choosing words.
Language. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I was going to say we're about a little bit less than 10 minutes. And I just wanted to say that we're not going to get through all the questions because we have so many, but we'll get to as many as we can. Let's see. Mercedes asks, what kind of scenes do you like to write the most? And which ones do you like to write the least? Let's start with most. What do you like to write the most?
Yeah. I like writing like a scene that's something that maybe is there's like a sentence in a letter talking about something, and then I have to make it into the whole event. So I like having the inspiration from one thing. There's a letter from Martha Washington when she's up in Boston during the Revolution, and she's saying, we hear there's a siege going on, and everybody who's already there is just used to hearing cannons all the time, the siege cannons, and how the first time she hears them, it completely freaks her out. And then she in time gets used to just that roar in the background. And so that was really fun to write about the first time that she hears that, what's happening, what's going on. And basically George says, it's no big deal. But to be able to take that one sentence from a letter and then just sort of spin it into a whole scene is fun for me.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Loretta? What do you like writing the most?
I think I like writing crowd scenes, group scenes the most when it's an exchange, several people are talking or a lot's going on. For some reason, that's fun.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it might be the movie quality of it, because I'm watching the action in my head, and it makes it fun to write and easier to write. And in terms of what's difficult, the sex scenes. Yeah. Because I'm not wanting to get too graphic. I don't want to get into, I don't want to get too technical. I want to keep it romantic. And I also don't want to write the same thing I've written before. So it's very challenging. And also it has to fit the individuals. So each couple is different, and I'm trying to make it feel right for that couple.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the ones. Yeah, when I know one of those scenes is coming up, I start having panic attacks. Oh boy, it needs to be good, because this is a culmination.
You do a great job at so many of the romance ones get very formulaic. But yours are unique to each couple.
And it's interesting you say that, because I have read that at least on like some TV shows and stuff, they say that writing those scenes, the sex scenes, the fight scenes, and the group scenes are sort of similar, because you just have to block them out. You just have to, who's going where,
That's
when,
a good point.
What's going in where, how. Enough
Yeah,
about
I know. I always think of that when you had to, because I've written romance too, and I remember doing this, that I kept sort of hearing that old Meatloaf song, you know, where it has the people calling out, how far will he get? He's at first base now. And it's like, no, he can't get to second base till farther on in the book, you know, it's just, but yeah, it was always kind of figuring out how much things were going to be, how many things will happen.
Yes. Yeah.
So Susan, what is the thing that you like to write about the least?
The least, I think it's really hard writing the death scenes. Some of the death scenes are really, because I can't leave them out. I can't just sort of say, you know, it was a spring day and Martha realized she only had one child left now. I mean, I can't do that because especially the deaths, I think are make people who they are. That loss is very important, especially for women. Sometimes you will read male historians that will sort of say people were used to death of children and they didn't name their children until they were 5 years old or something, you know, just because they knew they would all die. And it's like, no, it's not like that. It's not that callous. And I think that's another thing that you can, I mean, I feel it's important to include. There was one book I read, a biography about Martha that didn't even mention the younger children who had died. You know, they just didn't even exist. They just sort of said she had 2 children. It's like, no, she had 2 other ones. So, I mean, those are just really hard. They're hard to write. I guess as a mom myself, it's always it's hard. You always put something into all your characters. And you get to, well, I mean, one of the fun things about them, and Loretta and I both agree with this, that it is like a movie and you get to be in there. You get to be in the middle of these lives and these adventures. And when it's going well, it's the best. Best feeling. It's so much fun. But then when you're having to be Eliza Hamilton and poor Alexander is bleeding to death, that's not fun. That's not a fun one to write. And that's what, you know, you're crying at the computer and my husband is like, have you finished yet? Are you okay?
So yeah, it sounds somewhat traumatic.
It's what?
It sounds somewhat traumatic.
Well, but it is, if you care about your characters, you get to share their joys and the good stuff.
Yeah.
But the bad stuff too.
So I have a question that I'm not completely sure of. I understand it, but maybe you will. If possible, I would love to hear about the Regency era dandy Scrope, Birdmore, Davies. My friends and I have become oddly attached to his tiny corner of history, and I discovered the blog through a decades-old post about him. It would make my day just to hear anything about him.
Well, he was one of Byron's circle, I believe. I read his biography a really long time ago. And it's kind of an interesting story because there was this trunk filled with his stuff that was, I believe, found in a bank at some point, much later on, like in the 20th century. But right now, it was so long ago, I can't really remember very much about him.
Susan, do you remember anything about him?
No, that's sort of out of my experience. Was that the same trunk that they had the clothes on display at RISD? You and I saw that exhibition on the Mail.
I don't remember. I don't remember if it was Scrope Davies or not.
I don't know.
Okay, well, we've made somebody's day by.
Well, no, we didn't. We failed miserably.
Well, we brought it up, so that's so we are out of time, but I did want to ask really quickly, like, what's up next for you? I know, Susan, you mentioned Martha's, Loretta. Like, do you want to talk about what projects you're working on?
I'm still working on the third Difficult Dukes, which is finally starting to come together after however long it is. But it is coming together, and it has stopped being so much torture.
So I have to ask, do you think it'll be ready for our May 20th rom-con?
Oh, hell no.
No pressure. Loretta's going to be live and in person at the Ashland Library on May 20th. And I'm working on Susan.
She's trying. Well, it takes a long time for books to come out. And I think in the pandemic screwed up a lot of stuff. as far as like there wasn't enough paper to print books, and they moved things around in the schedule so there would be enough paper for your book. I mean, there was a lot of oddball things.
There
It
is
wasn't
not.
just us. And then of course we just get sidetracked and don't finish them on time. But hey,
Life has been busy. I did want to say that our anonymous attendee said, you didn't fail miserably, their day is made.
oh, that's good. That's good.
So Susan, did you want to say something about Martha?
No, it should be end of this year, early next year. I don't have a definite date yet, but I should know very soon, I hope.
Okay.
It has cover. It says on, if you could try and you can't pre-order it yet on Amazon because Amazon has listed it, the publication date as 2049. And I certainly hope it will be out before 2049. Who knows?
2049. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. It's there. I mean,
Nice.
it's a beautiful cover. You can see the cover and everything, but it's 2049.
I did see the cover. It is beautiful.
It is a beautiful cover.
So we will be talking about possibly doing this again, Two Nerdy History Girls Ride Again at some point, maybe.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we keep coming back like a bad penny.
Well, we spent a lot of time today talking about, sanitation, so we have to do other things. But thank you both again, of course. This has been amazing. And I really
Well,
appreciate
thank you,
everybody-
Mina.
Oh,
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
I love it. I really appreciate everybody's thoughtful and really funny questions. I've really enjoyed this tonight. So have a wonderful night, everybody. And Loretta and Susan, I will see you or talk to you soon.
And thank you. Goodbye to everybody who joined us.
Goodbye. Thank you for being here.
Yes.
Yep. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.